I stepped out of the taxi and smoothed the front of my dress blues. The metals on my chest felt heavier than usual. 6 months in a high-security zone. And the only thing keeping me upright was the quiet anticipation of finally being home. Then I looked up. Planted in the middle of my perfectly mowed lawn was a sign in bold red letters. Sold. Behind it, 2 men in coveralls were hauling my life out the front door. My books. My framed commendations. My clothes. Tossing them into a dumpster like they were trash. Standing on the porch watching it happen, beers in hand, were my father Richard and my brother Caleb. Richard didn't smile. He didn't wave. He just pointed a lazy finger at the dumpster and said, "You don't live here anymore." We cashed out. I didn't run. I didn't scream. I adjusted the strap of my bag and started walking up the driveway, my boots crunching on the gravel with the rhythm I'd perfected over a decade of service. My name is Jordan. I'm 29 years old. In my line of work, high-level logistics and intelligence for special operations, you learn very quickly that the loudest person in the room is usually the most vulnerable. Panic is a luxury I couldn't afford overseas. I certainly wasn't going to spend it on these two. As I closed the distance, I saw Richard's eyes flicker. He expected a tantrum. He expected the hysterical daughter he could gaslight into submission. Instead, he got a ghost. I stopped at the bottom of the steps and looked up at them. The positioning was designed to make me feel small. I had never felt taller. Caleb got into some trouble, Richard said, taking a swig of his beer like he was discussing a fender bender. He owes the wrong people. 120,000. We had to act fast. We? I asked. My voice was flat. I don't remember being part of the we that decided to liquidate my assets. Family sacrifices for family, Jordan. The old manipulation rolled off his tongue like scripture. You're single. You live in barracks half the time. You don't need a house. Your brother needed a lifeline. I looked at the house behind him. I remembered the day I bought it. 22 years old. Fresh off my first combat tour. Clutching a check made of hazard pay and sleepless nights. That house wasn't just wood and drywall. It was the only place in the world where I didn't have to watch my back. I had renovated it with my own hands, sanding the floors until my fingers bled, painting the walls a soft gray that finally quieted the noise in my head. They had tried to make me feel guilty for having stability back then. Now they were punishing me for it. But they made a critical error. They thought they had stripped me of my armor. They didn't realize the house was just a building. The fortress was inside me and they couldn't touch that. You used the power of attorney, I said. It wasn't a question. You signed it, Caleb chimed in with a smirk. He raised his wrist to check the time, and the sunlight caught the heavy gold face of a brand new Rolex. Flashy. Expensive. Bought with a deposit on my sanctuary. It was legal, sis. Dad saved my life. You should be happy you could help. He didn't look saved. He looked well-fed and arrogant. A parasite who had consumed enough of the host to feel powerful. I signed a power of attorney for medical decisions, I said, my eyes locked on the watch. In case I came back in a box. Not so you could loot my life while I was still breathing. It's done, Richard said, dismissing me with a wave. The buyer is signing the final transfer in 10 minutes. The money for the loan sharks is already wired. You can stay at the motel by the highway until you redeploy. It's not a big deal. That was the moment the last thread of attachment snapped. It wasn't just theft. It was erasure. I wasn't a person with a life or a future or rights. I was a resource to be harvested. An inventory item they could liquidate to cover their bad investments. They hadn't just sold my house. They had sold me. Is the buyer here? I asked. She's inside doing a final walkthrough, Richard said. Don't you dare make a scene. She paid cash. We need this deal to close. I smiled. It was the cold, sharp expression I usually reserved for enemy combatants. I wouldn't dream of making a scene, I said, stepping onto the porch. I just want to meet the new owner. The door opened before I could knock. A woman in a beige pantsuit stepped out. One look told me everything. She wasn't a family looking for a starter home. She was an investor. Sharp eyes, expensive manicure, the kind of person who scans a room for profit margins instead of warmth. She held the deed like a weapon. You must be the daughter, she said, her tone dismissive. She didn't offer a handshake. Your father told me you might stop by. Look, honey, it's done. Papers are signed. Money is transferred. I need you off my property before I call the cops. I glanced past her. Richard was standing by the kitchen island, holding a bank receipt with trembling hands. His face was flushed with the high of a man who thinks he just dodged a bullet. He looked up, saw me through the open door, and grinned. It's over, Jordan, he called out, waving the receipt. 120 wired straight to the loan sharks. Caleb is clear. The rest is in a secure account. You can't touch it. He wasn't sorry. He wasn't conflicted. He was proud. He genuinely believed he had pulled off the heist of the century against his own child. I looked back at the buyer. You wired the full amount? $650,000, she said, checking her watch. Cash. It cleared 10 minutes ago. Now get off my porch. I didn't move. I let the silence stretch, watching Richard's celebration and her impatience collide in the space between us. This was the moment. The trap was set. The bait was taken. The cage door had just slammed shut. You really should have waited for the title search, I said quietly. She scoffed. I buy distressed properties for cash all the time. I skip the red tape to beat the market. I know what I'm doing. Do you? I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. The document I pulled out wasn't a weapon, but it was about to do more damage than any rifle I'd ever carried. If you had run a title search, you would have seen that Richard doesn't own this house. He has power of attorney, she snapped, though her eyes flicked nervously to the paper in my hand. He has a general power of attorney, I corrected, which allows him to act on behalf of Jordan the individual. But Jordan the individual doesn't own this property anymore. I unfolded the document and held it up. It was a certified copy of a deed transfer, stamped and dated 48 hours before I deployed. I transferred the title to a revocable living trust 6 months ago. My father isn't a trustee. He has no authority over the trust's assets. He cannot sell what he does not own. I looked past her to Richard, who had frozen mid-celebration. The receipt in his hand suddenly looked less like a trophy and more like an indictment. That signature on your sale contract, I said, pointing to the papers in her hands. That's not a sale. That's forgery. And since you wired the money across state lines based on fraudulent documents, that's federal wire fraud. She snatched the paper from me. Her eyes scanned the legal text, the dates, the trust seal. The color drained from her face so fast she looked like she might faint. The deed she was holding, the one she had just paid over $500,000 for, was worthless. You, she whispered, turning to Richard. You said you had full authority. I do, Richard shouted, rushing to the door, panic cracking his voice. I have the POA. It's right here. Read the fine print, I said. It covers medical decisions and personal accounts. It does not cover assets held in a trust. You just sold a house you don't own to a woman who just lost $650,000. She turned on Richard with the focused rage of someone who had just watched $500,000 evaporate. Give me my money back. Reverse the wire. Now. Richard stumbled back against the counter. I can't. What do you mean you can't? I already sent the money for Caleb, he screamed, the truth tearing out of him. It's gone. The loan sharks took it. I can't get it back. The silence that followed was absolute. She stared at him. Caleb stared at the floor. And I just watched, feeling the cold, quiet satisfaction of a mission accomplished. They had wanted quick cash. They had wanted to bypass me. Instead, they had walked straight into a minefield I'd laid months ago, and now there was nowhere left to run. She pulled out her phone and dialed. I want to report a fraud in progress. Significant theft. Yes, the perpetrator is still here. Richard watched her make the call. Then slowly his gaze shifted to me. The panic hardened into something ugly and familiar. Not remorse. Not guilt. The white-hot indignation of a man who has been exposed in front of an audience. You did this, he spat, pointing a shaking finger at me. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. I didn't sign the papers, Richard. I didn't wire the money. You knew, he screamed, his voice cracking. You stood there and watched me do it. You let me sign those papers. You let me send that money. I gave you a choice, I said. I asked if you wanted to tell me the truth. You chose to lie. You chose to double down. He wasn't looking at me anymore. He was looking past me, out the open front door, where a few neighbors had gathered on the sidewalk, drawn by the noise. That was the real injury. It wasn't the handcuffs that terrified him. It was the humiliation. The loss of the image he had spent decades building. You wanted to make me look like a criminal, he roared. You are a criminal, I said. I just turned on the lights. I raised you, he yelled, rewriting history in real time. I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me? By tricking me? By ruining your brother over a house you don't even use. That was when I finally understood. Even standing on the edge of prison, he could not imagine himself as the villain. My independence felt like betrayal to him. My survival felt like an attack. I didn't trick you, I said. I protected myself. If my safety feels like a trap to you, that says everything. Sirens outside. Red and blue flooding the room. Officers moved in. Richard's rage collapsed the moment he saw the uniforms, and he tried one last pivot. His voice went soft, pleading. Jordan, you can stop this. Tell them it's a misunderstanding. I'm your father. You stopped being my father when you treated me like a bank account. They cuffed him without resistance. Neighbors watched as the man who had ruled this house was led down the driveway in handcuffs. I thought it was over. Then Caleb stepped in front of me, blocking the door. He held up his phone. On the screen was a drafted email addressed to my division's inspector general. It accused me of selling stolen military equipment, fake invoices, a forged bank transfer. His eyes were flat and cold, stripped of all the earlier arrogance. This was desperation. One accusation like this, he said quietly, and your clearance is gone. Drop the charges. Sign the house back over. Or I hit send. I didn't beg. I laughed. Go ahead, I said. Send it. He froze. My finances are audited every month, I continued. Your fake documents don't match a single federal record. If you send that email, you're not exposing me. You're confessing to fabricating evidence against a military officer. His phone dropped slightly. The arrogance evaporated and left only panic underneath. I raised my hand toward the nearest officer. He's attempting extortion using falsified military documents. I want to press charges. They cuffed him too. He screamed that it was a joke, that he wasn't serious. Intent was enough. As the cruisers pulled away, I stood in the driveway and watched until the lights disappeared around the corner. The weight I'd been carrying lifted, not into the air, but into the ground where it belonged. I walked back to the lawn and pulled the sold sign out of the dirt. I carried it to the dumpster and dropped it in. Inside, the house was empty and quiet. No voices. No demands. No one calculating what they could take next. For the first time in years, no one needed saving. I reset the security codes. One clean beep confirmed it. I wasn't happy yet, but I was safe. And after everything, that was more than enough. If you have ever had to become the villain in someone else's story just to survive your own, you already know what that beep feels like.